Three, two, one.
Next up is Voices of Change with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Voices of Change is to connect, inform, and empower people to engage in social political change. Right here on USALA Radio.
Hello, everyone. You have just joined Voices of Change on USALA Radio with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Today, we're going to have an interesting conversation about our prison system here in the United States, but in particular here in Pennsylvania. A topic of discussion is reimagining corrections and reentry, specifically here in Pennsylvania. Preparing inmates for a successful return home after incarceration from a state correctional institution. The goal is to help individuals not only to transition back into society, but to help them become law-abiding citizens and obtain life-sustaining employment, which is paramount to their success. It is an important part of having success when someone comes back out of being incarcerated for X amount of time. Now, one of the things that I want to do a compare and contrast today, we have one individual here who was a superintendent of the prison system, Lamas, Mrs. Lamas. She is here with us today to discuss this issue and to discuss how we can do a better job here in Pennsylvania in reforming this system, in reimagining our correctional system and our reentry system here in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that we're going to do today is to look at, the principle behind these changes. How can we do this? Taking away someone's freedom is the punishment. We know that. Prison itself, it shouldn't be cruel, and it shouldn't be, if we want to release good neighbors back into the community, we have to treat this in a humane way. And one of the models that I'm going to be talking about today will be the way Norway is teaching America how to make prisons more humane. In Norway, and we were talking about these stats before we went on live, they have the world's lowest recidivism rate at 20%, whereas here in the United States, we have a 68% of recidivism rate in the United States after a prisoner has been released within 3 years. Obviously, the model here is punishment versus the model in Norway. It seems to be more of rehabilitation. And so the goal here is we have to look at an innovative prison reform strategy that have been adapted by prison officials in countries like Rwanda, Singapore, and Norway to prepare inmates for a successful return home after incarceration and helping them become law-abiding citizens. And in order to do that, we have to implement strategies that include treatment services, educational and vocational training, mental health management, re-entry and transitional services, including employment. Lamas, it is a pleasure to have you with us here on USALA Radio. Aissia, thank you for co-hosting this show. Ladies, thank you and welcome.
Good to be on.
Yeah. Aissia, if you want to chime in, but, Lamas, one of the things that I want to say is Pennsylvania is behind, and I would say even the system seems to be very antiquated in the way we treat our prisoners, in the way that we treat reentry, and that whole system, if you will, the entire system of process from the point that you go in, that you are incarcerated to the point that you come out, it seems to me this system definitely needs to be reformed. What is your thoughts about that and how we can move in that direction?
Well, I think the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections system progresses probably not at the pace that people would want to see it. Understand that corrections historically has been certainly in the eastern part of the United States, mostly based on punishment. I would ask you to look at Eastern State Penitentiary and how that was built. Kind of, we call that a wagon wheel, where there's one central location and all the housing units kind of go off of that. So, and based on the Quakers and kind of the very punitive religious stock that Pennsylvania came from.
Right.
So, with that as the foundation, Pennsylvania has definitely tried to take some strides in terms of progression, and progression all the while ensuring that victims' rights are um, victim rights are upheld, and that the community and the staff are safe. So it's almost you're balancing three balls up in the air continually. But is it a safe assumption to say that historically Pennsylvania has had a bit of a punitive backbone? Unequivocally.
Yeah.
My hope is that certainly, and I was privileged to work under both Secretary Jeff Beard and Secretary John Wetzel, that we have taken steps in that progressive direction to ensure that the men and women that we release are better men and women, neighbors, family members than when they were first incarcerated.
Right.
For that moment in time in which they committed their offense.
Yeah. You were, you went through the ranks yourself. Starting as a CO, and then you were a warden, then you were superintendent of our prison system here in Pennsylvania.
Well, as a matter of fact, I started in the counselor ranks.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So my philosophy has always been rehabilitation. I started off as a counselor, kind of worked my way up through the ranks as a unit manager, deputy warden, and warden and superintendent are the same term. Yeah. It's just in the north, kind of in Pennsylvania, we use the term superintendent, and kind of every place else uses the term warden.
Right.
But I kind of went up through the ranks that way, always with an understanding that my job was not to cause further harm.
Right.
But my job was to try to have repair in that individual's life, because when I saw them again in the community, I wanted that exchange to be a positive exchange for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I just chime in real quick about that last visit to SCI Chester that was put on by the lifers, and the comment that you made, Marirosa, about how our current prison system is not set up to deal with an aging population. And that there are people who are there and will be there who should not be. And that that we do need to look at our policies, our programs, our practices to be able to come into from the dark ages, really, because our penal institutions were created, around punishment and not around this issue of redemption. And yes, we do need to look at the victims, but many times the victim is the same person that may be incarcerated too. So the one thing that I did appreciate about SCI Chester was that it was a therapeutic unit, and it was a therapeutic site where people were in therapy to really figure out, what was going on with them and where they were and where they could be, and making their lives better and the lives of the people who they touch better too.
Yeah.
I would like to say, and certainly it has remained the same under the current superintendent, Kenneth Eason, that, therapy happens everywhere. So yes, we have specific drug and alcohol therapy, cognitive-based therapies, but therapy also begins in your interaction with those men and women on a daily basis. And my my march as a superintendent was always to be in the compound with the inmates interacting, because that's therapy. Not so much for them, but it was always therapy for me, because
Mm-hmm.
they gave me so much more than what I could possibly ever give to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, in how you speak to them, in how you speak and return, and how you model that behavior, is all the pieces of therapy that we need to incorporate into our penal system.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of have always been an outlier in my within my colleagues, um, because of how I am so demonstrative when it comes to my inmates, to my men and women that I was privileged to serve. And so, yes, Chester, in essence, and it's exceptionally therapeutic facility. But I believe that our culture is one that leads the state in how we want to interact
Mm-hmm.
and and emulate with the men that we are honored to serve with.
Yeah. And one of the things, Aisha, this reimagining concept that we're talking about, I believe that it places human dignity and its philosophy and at its core, at its operational core. And and if we look at it from that standpoint, it promotes public safety. It provides a successful reentry system, and then it also creates transparency. So if what you're saying, Lamas, you know, we can institute throughout Pennsylvania, because Chester seems to be the model for this. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Chester I think there's only two prison systems in Pennsylvania that has a therapeutic model. Is that right?
So Chester was originally built as a drug and alcohol facility.
Right.
And I would like to also say that more than likely Muncie, which is the female facility, one of the female facilities, we have two. It umbrellas a lot of therapeutic models because, as you know, women bring a whole different set of challenges into
Yes.
corrections uh, through trauma based therapies that these women at times um, really, and I sound, I don't know, but by no fault of their own,
Mm-hmm.
ended up incarcerated. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had the pleasure of being the warden at Muncie also.
Mm.
And I've
Mm.
always said, and will always say, that a well rounded superintendent has been able to work at both a female and a male facility. And as a
Yes.
female, you see yourself in the eyes of these women. And if you fail to
Mm.
see yourself in the eyes of these women, you should probably not be there. You should probably have
Mm-hmm.
another job.
Yeah. Taught, this issue, I mean, some of the issues that we have in our DOC, Department of Corrections, whether it's a female or male uh, prison, there's issues surrounding, solitary confinement and restrictive housing, um, about educational opportunities for inmates, especially for lifers, um, expansion of medical and mental health care services within our prison system, training support, um, I would say, for correctional officers on how to manage, how to work with inmates. In your years of experience, do you see any progress on these fronts? And if not, uh, do you feel this is more of a political and policy issue that needs to be that pressure needs to be put, pressure points needs to be put on the policy and politician part of this to get these
I think
reforms done?
it. I think it's twofold. Of course, we have made some inward roads in terms of training for our staff I used to run and oversee the crisis intervention training program for the department that specifically sets out and delineates staff members to be sent when one of our inmates are having a mental health crisis. And that then in turn reduces any type of punitive outcomes, i.e. solitary confinement, of which we do not use for those individuals who are mentally ill, seriously mentally ill. We do not use solitary confinement anymore. That was under John Wetzel. He just did a phenomenal job in that. And yes, we've made some strides, but there is a huge backing that corrections must be punitive, and it frustrates me, because what if we treat them worse? What are you expecting when they are released?
Yeah.
And so when you model appropriate behavior, you model what you expect in others to see, then you will benefit. You, generally speaking, will benefit. But I must say that there is a huge vein in politics that say, nope, you did this, and I want every single ounce that you can give me for that. And that in turn waylays into why we have individuals who are 80, 75 years old, who have served 40 years of a life sentence, who will die in jail and pose absolutely no public safety concerns.
Yeah.
And if you just want to look at dollars and cents, it is more cost effective to have them released than to keep them incarcerated.
Yeah.
And so now at that juncture, all we're doing is being punitive.
Well,
so are men.
Yeah.
All we're doing is being punitive.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a breaking news today that I want to your point, Lamas and Aissia. Today, there was a decision by the Illinois Supreme Court to uphold a 130-year prison sentence of a 16-year-old for rape and murder charges. There was a ruling today. It was a decision 6-1 in the Illinois Supreme Court. It reversed a lower court ruling saying that Ashanti charges were unconstitutional because he was a juvenile at the time of his sentencing. So the ruling of this is what we're talking about: antiquated laws, and even in our court system, where we're still, even though this man is 41 years old now. I mean, to uphold a ruling like that, when you and I know there was a ruling in 2012 when it came to juvenile lifers, which we have 2,000 of them across the United States. In Pennsylvania, we have about 500, and releasing a lot of them from our prison system. But this type of antiquated type of thinking is what doesn't allow this compassion that you're talking about and this rehabilitation that we're talking about to take place in our prison systems across the United States.
And I would venture to say, and I would really kind of be dogmatic about my approach, that it's it's rehabilitation, but it's human dignity at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And so what?
Yeah.
What more do you want? You've never done anything wrong.
Yeah.
You've never, ever, or you've never been caught. And so what is it? How do you want to be treated? Because I know that I go, when I used to work, every day into my prisons and be like, but for the grace of God, go I.
Yeah.
Because there was not a big difference between those that were confined and myself.
Yeah.
And I was born and raised in Puerto Rico by a Puerto Rican single mom, a widow, who we came to the United States not knowing how to speak English, learned how to speak English, and raised us in a very strict, draw within the borders type of way. And now at 53, I look back at my mom and say, how did she do it?
Mhm.
How?
Yeah.
And
But
but for the grace of God. And so being a warden or being a superintendent or being a correctional officer is not about the power that you perceive you have, but it's the power that you must give away to emblazon and light the fire of those individuals that you work with.
yeah. And one of the things, the arguments, and I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here, Aisha and Lamas. The one of the arguments that it's very well rehearsed by the people that give pushback to this is that it's not fair to the victims, and if prison is so nice, what's the incentive to avoid it? So that's the argument that you get from a lot of the strong pushback that you get from a lot of people who are not in favor of this. But you made an interesting point when you went to this. You went to Norway and you were able to see the conditions and how the inmates were treated there. You said if prisons are only punitive and prisoners treated inhumanely, you said I challenge you as to what that person will be when they are released. And that's a very interesting point. You're right. If you're not treated with dignity and respect while you're incarcerated, when you come out, what's to say, any transformation of that prisoner when he does come out? I think that's to your point. I think that's a fair and valid point that you made.
Well, I think it also goes back to what Marirosa said about how it's a cultural
That's it.
issue.
That's it.
And so I think that, I would like to hear what her personal experiences were visiting Norway and the setting up of Little Scandinavia. And if you could talk a little bit about what was your favorite part about it and what was the most disappointing part about it.
So, we went over for, let me say, 4 weeks.
Mm.
4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. Memory is escaping me, but we went over and toured several other facilities. We went to Norway, we went to Denmark, we went to Sweden, and toured facilities in each of the countries that kind of make up Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and I forget right now. But nonetheless, we went over and kind of looked at it. The inmate population all have what would be considered small dorm, and I'm going to use air quotes, dorm-like cells. So they have one to each cell, a cell, restroom, shower, desk, kind of, and then there are common areas in where the inmates can come out. They cook with the staff. They're able to do those type of things, and they eat together. Everybody goes to work. It's fascinating that they have very small incidences of violence towards staff, though in comparison to what we would consider restrictive tools, they are out for the use of the inmate and or the staff. Now, what I didn't understand is that their solitary confinement uses what they call a French drain, which is a non-visible or non-freestanding toilet. And so it's almost like a squatting position.
Mm-hmm.
I found that to be exceptionally inhumane. And maybe that's a cultural piece that I was unaware of, but I just could not wrap my head around that. And they showed that with extreme pride, like, hey, it's a mural of a forest and yada, yada, yada. And here's this kind of like French drain. And I was like, okay, I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
The other piece, and I am a compound, or I was a compound superintendent, is that the superintendents really are more administrative and not in the compound. And so I I did not understand how you then could get your message across. If there's certain policy changes or things like that, but they push it down to their deputy wardens and their unit managers. And so the superintendent is really an administrative kind of headpiece. For me, that would not have worked. I don't like that. But what I found, which I was so at peace with, is the fact that, I always said to my staff, and I say it again and again and again, food is the great equalizer. As, as silly as that may sound, I believe that to this day. When you break bread with someone in that exchange of helping it to make it, eating it, having that conversation, everything becomes equal. I don't become Superintendent Lamas. I become Miss Lamas. You become Mr. Not inmate Smith. And I always called my gentleman by Mr. or Ms. You're Mr. Smith. Or at the end, I would reference them by their first name. And so it's a great equalizer. And so you and I are sharing the same thing. It's not like staff eat this, inmates eat that. I find that, for me, one of the great pieces. And it's a modeling of expectations. It really, really is. They don't carry cuffs.
Yeah.
They carry a set of keys and that's it. And I think a whistle. And so for us, we put this big utility belt over our belt and, just kind of furthers that us against them. This is who we are. This is who you are. Culture that if we're going to get to a place where we can truly be impactful in prison reform, we need to start stripping these layers away that are so antiquated.
Yeah.
And have proven not to keep the community safe. So.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, one of the interesting things also about the Norway prison system, Lamas, is that, for instance, here we pay, I think, $42,727 per inmate. That's kind of pretty much per inmate. There, the budget is more like 120 in their money per inmate. And the other interesting fact that I was reading is that they train their correction officers 2 years before they can get on the job. Whereas here, a correction officer goes through a 7 weeks of orientation and classroom before they become a CO. So I think they take that issue of being humane, of leveraging those relationships, of making them feel the inmates, making them feel not like inmates, but as human beings. I think that model seems to be very effective there, and how do we start implement or modeling, if you will, what you saw there versus here? What do you think are the steps necessary to get to that point?
Biasly, and I own that. You're correct in the fact that they have people are, air quote, breaking their necks to be a corrections officer in Scandinavia. They just are. It's 2 years. You come out of there with the equivalent of maybe an associate's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, and then is when you go and become begin to start working in a correctional facility, which is much different than what we have here. So here, you know, we have civil service rules that we have to follow, certain things that really clog up and at times do not allow us to get the best fish out of that pond, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so for us, I would say once Chester gets Little Scandinavia up and going, begin to replicate that in small increments to ensure success. You know, you're not going to lose 150 pounds or lose 50 pounds from a Monday to a Friday. You're going to do it with slow, purposeful, incremental steps. And that is the same way. But you really have to have the backing of your staff. I think Superintendent Eson has that, and we had it when we were there. You have to work with labor management. You have to work with the unions involved. At times, not the most pleasant part of my job, but certainly they bring a great and valuable voice to the table, and ensure that your mindset of punishment now needs to be a mindset of modeling behaviors, acceptable behaviors.
Right. Well, talking about modeling behaviors, an interesting, you know, quote or information that actually came from Secretary Wenzel, and I'm just reading off what he found. He, you know, and he put out there where correctional officers have a higher rate of substance abuse, mental health problems, and suicide. In fact, he goes on to say that there were like 8 suicides in his department. He also stresses the fact that he found that prison officers suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders at the same levels as people in war zones, a rate 6 times higher than the general population. Now, if we're talking about modeling behavior and you have correctional officers with these issues dealing with a population that also exhibits these issues, how do we leverage that?
Because the environment's going to be different.
Right.
You know, for us, correctional staff, our life expectancy after retirement is 6 years.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
53. That means I'm not going to hit 60? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's also in that environment of, okay, it's us against them. I got to get them before they get me. I got to keep my guard up. It's this lockstep that in reality, if we would take small measures, it will help our staff tremendously. And we have phenomenal staff. I mean, I'm biased, and I think Chester, certainly Muncie, and all the places in where I've been honored to work have phenomenal staff who go in there and really are like, okay, I'm going to give it 110%. However, the construct of corrections doesn't allow a lot of play for that human piece. And so then we bring it home, and then we can't speak about it. And then we eat it away. We drink it away. We have really not great coping skills, which then leads to those things. And we see things in prison that not a lot of people would want to see.
Yeah.
But I think that if we could change, even, you know, and I would challenge you, and I would ask you to reach out to Chester, and once they can have visits again and allow folks through this COVID environment back in, take a look at CA, take a look at their Little Scandinavian unit, and compare it to another housing unit. It is like dusk to dawn. It is completely different. And the minute you get in there, you're like, no more stress.
So that's actually implemented now at
At
CSI
Chester,
Chester. Yes.
it has it. I like to say almost like in building of the house, it has the rough structure,
Uh huh.
but really, COVID has, as with everything else, has just kind of put a kibosh on a whole lot of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Um, and it came right. It has, really done a number on how we could continue to implement that. But I am confident that Superintendent Eson, and I would ask you to reach out to him, that one, and he was over in Scandinavia with me, as the heir apparent. And so once this we can lift, go and you'll see a completely different housing unit. They have fish, they have an aquarium, it's completely different.
Well, I think they had like 128, and now they're down to 68 in the housing unit. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so that reduction in inmates, that was purposely done to implement this model. That when you guys came back, that's how you started implementing this model at CSI.
Prior to COVID, yes.
Okay.
Yes. We changed everything, the furnishings. Um, they have a kitchen. Everybody has a fridge. Superintendent Eson is trying to, after COVID, ensure so the inmates in Scandinavia can go grocery shopping within the commissary of each facility. Well, grocery shopping teaches a whole lot. Teaches budget.
Yeah.
Teaches wants and needs. What do you want? What do you need? So those are all kind of structural pieces that can really begin to help implement a better reentry for the men, currently the men who would be in the Scandinavian Prison Project.
Yeah. Aisha, you have any other questions? Okay, so I think Aisha.
Wait. No, I just took myself off mute, and yeah, we did get I was fortunate enough to get a invitation from Secretary Wetzel to go to visit SCI Chester, so I know that he's committed to continuing that model, and I know that he's also committed to re-envisioning reentry. And so one of the things that I was really interested in is talking a little bit about the Fortune Society. And the Fortune Society is a model project in New York that is run by former inmates and looks at therapy, jobs, training, and housing. And so I think that might be something that we might be able to institute here in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, and in Philadelphia. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how that reentry support, particularly among the juvenile lifers, has been phenomenal in making sure that people don't parole violate, or if there are parole violations, they're short and not egregious, and that the juvenile lifers have really developed a support system to be able to check in with each other and make sure that folks are not going back.
Yeah. What?
I agree. I think those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. And no other but a juvenile lifer will know how it is to be incarcerated 30 years and then have to go out.
Oh, I think you muted yourself, Marirosa. I think you muted yourself by accident.
Yeah, she probably muted herself by accident.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
So sorry.
That's,
So, I think part of that, the juvenile lifers have those groups that they meet with, or at least that they used to meet with prior to COVID, PC. And we have been thoughtful in, if there is, listen, everybody has a mishap. Every single human has a mishap. If there is a mishap, then as Aisha said, it is not egregious and we just wipe the slate clean so you can begin again. We look at it for what it is. It's a moment in your life, and then how do we get over this?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think Aisha, to your point of this reimagining, uh, our prison system, I think we are on on our way there, and I think Secretary Wenzel, who has done a phenomenal job, trying to because he also went through the ranks, and he was skeptical himself when he went and took this trip about how they were doing that model that they implemented in Norway. He was skeptical, but he saw the the benefits of it. And we have to, here in the United States, we have to find a way to shift the goal and the culture of incarceration from retribution to rehabilitation. That's just the bottom line. We have to find a way to do this, and we have to envision smaller correctional systems
Yes.
that places human dignity at its philosophical and operational core. And that's just the bottom line. We have to do that. And if we, and I know there's been a decrease in our prison system because there has been a big push across the United States to de-incarcerate. I think we need to get to that, Lama. And I think we're on our way there, even though there is pushback politically in policy, on the policy front of this, there's also pushback. But we have to come to some resolution where we can find a model that can be focused on rehabilitation at its core. Would you agree with that?
Unequivocally, 100%. Sign me up, raising my hand. Where's the rally? I'm there.
Yeah, you would be a good advocate for that. Absolutely. Aisha, you have anything else for Lamas?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much, and also you look fabulous. So retirement is doing you well, and I want to thank you because it takes a special person to get up every day happy to go into a correctional facility. So that's the kind of leader that we need in the future as we are re-envisioning corrections so that we can um, bring forth a model for the 21st century. I think that it's incumbent upon us who are in these positions to be able to provide that leadership that thinks beyond the box, that thinks beyond what we have, and really look at what we want in ourselves, what we want in our society, and what we want for the people that are in our universe, right? So just thank you. I'm inspired. I've always been inspired by your work, and yeah, I'm looking forward to going back to SCI Chester and taking a look at the little Scandinavia. And I do want to say publicly that Mr. Michael Lyons, who I correspond with, says hello and you're missed.
Oh, yeah. Michael Lyons, great individual, also a model prisoner as well. Lamas, I would say. And at the end of the day, I'm going to say this, and I will continue to say this. We have to enlist at least three critical audiences to have reform in our prison system. You have to have the justice system stakeholders in place. You have to those who run our prison systems and our jails, and then you have to have the policymakers and the general public to formulate this new vision and ultimately influence federal and state policy to change the way we incarcerate people and change the way we treat people within our prison system. And Lamas, I met you a long time ago, and I tell you, if we have people, we have people that think like you, and view things the way you view them in terms of our prison system, thinking, viewing it more as rehabilitation than punishment. I think we can definitely transform our prison system here in Pennsylvania. And I think we need more of Lamas. We need more of Lamas like you to advocate and to voice this type of transition and transformation within our prison system.
Well, I am confident, and I agree with you, Leslie, that justice, the department, and policymakers are the stakeholders that need to be at the table, um, to make these small, purposeful, incremental steps. And in regards to the men and the women that I was honored to serve, they will always be the highlight of my career, always. And every day I was thankful, and I'm still thankful.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Well, thank you so much.
so
Yeah, and thank you
thank you.
for what you have done. Obviously, you have had an enormous impact on a lot of folks and a lot of inmates that you have come in contact with throughout your career. Aisha, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for always taking time to co-host the show, and thank you for what you do because you're also a voice in our community
Mm,
as a whole. So thank you, Aisha.
thank you. Yep.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, we have concluded this segment of Voices of Change on Usula Radio, and we were talking about reimagining our prison system. And at the end of the day, there has to be an actionable new vision with a set of principles reflecting human dignity and promoting transparency and rehabilitation. And ultimately, that's our goal, and that's why we're having this conversation. Until the next time, see you and take care.
Bye bye.